if you look at agriculture, I think we're in the fourth wave of agriculture, starting with, industrial revolution, steam power tractors, and then, you know, big chemicals, which is 1950s and 60s. And then now we're getting to the agriculture technology and precision agriculture. And then maybe at the same time, regenerative, which is going back to some of those older farming processes more in a more automated manner. There's a place for everything, but if you start, which I think is what RFKJ is like, let's look at people's health, which really is the most important aspect of this, and then backward sort of plan, or look down the food system, food chain. Maybe that's the right place to start is with the health of people, and lead with that.
Hello and welcome to Collapse Life. I'm Zahra Sethna, your host, and I'm happy you're here. Do me a quick favor and help us out by hitting this subscribe button now. Thank you so much. So, tariffs are all over the headlines right now, and so is the rising MAHA movement. That's Make America Healthy Again. But what does all of this mean for the people who grow our food? How could shifting policies and cultural currents impact the future of agriculture? Our guest today is Chris Rawley, founder and CEO of Harvest Returns, a platform that connects investors with sustainable, regenerative farming and agribusiness opportunities. Chris, it's great to have you back. Nice to see you.
Love being back on. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks so much. There's so much to unpack and not a lot of time, so let's get right into it. Of course, tariffs are the big conversation right now, and everybody's talking about what the impacts will be both domestically and globally. So I wanted to start there and just ask you, what do you think are the biggest threats and opportunities for American farmers if tariffs ramp up?
Yeah, that seems to be the question of the day. And, I'm not going to lie and say I've got a crystal ball, because we could have this conversation and in 30 seconds, something could change. That's how rapidly the situation is changing. Right. But, there are some things that I think are important to point out. The most obvious one is your perspective on these tariffs depends on where you sit, and agriculture is no different. You hear one of the best parts of our jobs is getting to talk to farmers and ranchers all over the country. We also talk to investors from all over the country, and they all have very unique perspectives depending on which part of agriculture they are involved with. And so it's interesting because there's different facets. One is, what are you producing? So the commodities are going to be impacted differently depending on how much of an exposure to export market they have. So if you are a soybean farmer in the Midwest and your primary customer is China, you might be thinking about this a little differently than if you are a grass-fed beef producer in the Western United States, Montana, that sort of thing. From the beef producers, we do a lot of that business. We hear from, especially grass-fed beef, they are all about these tariffs. 75-80% of the grass-fed meat that we consume in the U.S., even if it might be, say, packaged in the USA or product of the USA, is actually from Australia or New Zealand.
Wow.
And they repackage it, and the labeling rules allow them to say product of the USA, even though it's imported. So if you've got a herd of cattle and you're a beef producer somewhere, you might be pretty excited about the tariffs and the potential for beef from overseas costing more than it does to produce it domestically. Mm-hmm. But again, it's the other thing that's important that people are, oh, what about the farmers? The farmers, well, they've already made some exemptions for some of the important inputs. So like potash, which is the primary fertilizer for a lot of ag production in the U.S., is exempt. Some of the pesticides are exempt. Some of the lubrication oils and things that you need to run tractors, those have been exempt. So I don't think most people in agriculture are extremely worried about it, but you hear a lot of moaning and groaning just because people are, I think, mostly fear the uncertainty, not necessarily the tariffs themselves.
Exactly. There's so much unknown, which obviously causes a lot of instability and a lot of fear. Do you think that, one of the threats on the horizon is supply chain breakdown, and that there might be scarcity on the shelves because of so much food that's imported into our country that's not necessarily directly related to farmers, as you mentioned. But do you think that there might be deepening food insecurity coming out of these tariffs?
In some places there may be. In the U.S., I'm not so sure. Fortunately, we do produce a lot of food in this country, and we produce more than we can consume, which is why we've got a great export market.
Mhm.
Um, I won't say we produce all the right kinds of food. We certainly produce food we probably shouldn't be producing in such quantities, for various reasons. But I don't foresee that there's going to be major supply. It's not going to be like COVID. Fortunately, we didn't see big runs. I mean, I know a lot of people are advocating, oh, farmers or any kind of manufacturers, producers need to stock up on things.
Mhm.
I mean, I guess in some ways that's smart, but in other ways that's just going to create shortages. Like
Right.
whenever you purchase toilet paper for some mysterious reason during COVID. Yeah, I'm a definitely I definitely think people should be prepared, whether you're your personal situation or you run a company, you should be prepared and have some allowances for potential crises. But in this case, I'm not sure these tariffs are going to be that crises that people think they're going to be.
That's good to hear from your perspective. I know as we were talking in advance of this interview that you had mentioned that you see some actually big changes coming out and a sort of MAHA effect, the
Mhm.
Robert F. Kennedy effect. So tell me what you see happening in food and farming right now.
Yeah, so I think I don't know any statements that he's made specific to certain areas since he's been in charge of Health and Human Services, which of course includes several different agencies that are important to the food system. But
Mhm.
what he has said in the past, prior to the election, was there's some things he's very just personally against, and I think you could maybe see that those starting to flow into policies like seed oils.
Uh-huh.
That's an interesting thing that we have a lot of production that goes into seed oils in the U.S. But there's an overall movement against seed oils, and I'm not smart enough in nutrition to explain the health reasons behind it, but there are some really smart PhD nutritionists, doctors that can argue against things like canola oil, corn oil,
Mhm.
and how it's not great for our food. Pesticide intensive agriculture is something he's talked about. And again, if you're one of those Midwest row crop farmers making soybean and corn, and it's a very conventional pesticide usage, it goes into a lot of that production, then that might be challenged. And then things like ultra processed foods, and that's an interesting one because there's all these food ingredients. There's clean food, what people call clean food, beef and vegetables and milk and things like that, and then you put those through a lot of processes, some of those ingredients through a lot of processes and heating and adding chemicals and subtracting chemicals and things, and you have ultra processed foods. and
Right.
and so I think it's going to be more challenging if you're a consumer product good that's in that space, making those ultra processed foods, or on the ag side potentially making the ingredients to go into the ultra processed foods.
Yeah. So there's a group of people who are celebrating any kind of discussion about making America healthy again.
Mhm.
Um, as you mentioned, though, within farming, that's a broad range from the sort of commercial end of
Mhm.
intensive farming down to the local regenerative
Mhm.
sustainable farmer. So generally speaking, how is all this landing in the agriculture community? And then I know you work specifically with a lot of regenerative farmers, so kind
Yes.
of obviously they're going to be a little bit more excited. So what are you sensing? Are they nervous? Are they celebrating? Are they welcoming this, or are they just sort of carrying on as though nothing's changing?
Well, it's very interesting because we know some regenerative people that are very excited about this whole movement because it really supports what they've been talking about, for all these years, and trying to get people to pay attention to of produce food that is healthy for the environment and for people, and that um, creates actually improves the soil and the watersheds and things like that. At the same time, there's an element of that crowd that is just very, I would say, anxious about what's going on, and maybe
Mhm.
that's more of a political thing um, than a logical thing. They're kind of leading with their politics versus what they actually believe.
Right.
So it's a little bit, it's dynamic for sure.
That's interesting. I read a recent study that showed that about 70% of respondents in the study had heard of regenerative
Mhm.
agriculture, but only about 12% on a global level would actually consistently pay more for products that come from a regenerative nature. What would you say is blocking both the consumers and the farmers from bigger adoption?
Yeah, it's a lot of things. One, there's varying definitions of what does regenerative actually mean,
Hmm.
and that translates into the labeling. So, if I want a regenerative good, regeneratively produced, say beef or lamb or something like that, or any other food, I don't know how to buy it, right? Unless I'm going to a local farmer's market and the guy has a label on his stand that says regeneratively produced beef. That's kind of the most micro aspect of the whole thing. But if I'm going to big box store and I want regeneratively produced food, there's probably not labels out there that reflect that. So I don't actually know how to buy it. Maybe I would
Hmm.
pay more if it was readily available or if I knew what it was. The other There are some really practical agriculture agronomy related things about scaling. As I mentioned, we produce a lot of things in the U.S. Livestock, but also fruits and vegetables and grains, and a lot of those things are require just this system that is in place. Big
Hmm.
agriculture is one way to put it, and that's the chemicals and the inputs and the seed, and those are controlled by a relatively small a number of companies. And then on the purchasing side, same thing. The distribution system all revolves around smaller numbers of large companies, and there's some economies of scale. So it's hard to break those economies of scale. That didn't happen overnight. That happened over a period of years and decades. So to move into regenerative food, that's going to take some time. And you can go other places in the world where people don't even talk about this because everything is produced quite differently in the U.S.
Right.
A lot, large parts of Europe. I think most of the developing world, or countries that are underdeveloped countries, they don't even know. They don't have this conversation because they produce food the way they've always been producing it.
Hmm.
With organic, whatever kind of organic materials they can have to improve the soil quality. Now there's some things about that. It results in lower yield and potentially higher cost. But we know profitable regenerative producers, and it's possible to do it. You just have to be smart about it.
So, talk about what Harvest Returns is doing to try and support that.
Mhm. Yeah. So our company in a nutshell is we have a pool of investors that want to allocate their capital to agriculture, and companies on the other side of the equation, farms and ranches and agriculture companies come to us that want to raise capital to expand their businesses, start new businesses, that sort of thing. So we have a bias. We actually did a study the other day. About 70% of the companies that we supported, farms and ranches, are on the regenerative, organic, sustainable side of farming. So it's not an exclusive thing that we have, but I'd say just by kind of virtue of the fact of the way we look at these companies, most of them fall into that category. And so investors can come to us and decide they want to invest in one of these companies or one of our funds, and not only help support the industry, but also get some returns.
And how do you convince investors that regenerative agriculture is a good return on investment?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about it a lot and talk about all the qualities and why it's important, why we feel it's good for the environment and good for people's health. But it really comes down to, can we produce a track record of returns on investments? And so that's we've been doing that, and for the most part that works out. Occasionally we have missteps, but I think most of our investors are pretty happy with the returns they've received specific to those regenerative types of investments.
Do you find some investors still feeling like this kind of farming is a bigger risk than the more conventional, traditional type of farming?
There is that perspective there. Yeah. And there's, we're obviously not the only place that somebody can go and invest in agriculture. There are some um, platforms out there that do exactly the opposite of what we do. And you go out and invest in conventional row crop farming out there, pesticide, fertilizer intensive, synthetic fertilizer intensive types of farming. And that's really not what we do.
I know one of the other pillars that you offer to investors is food tech. And
Hmm.
that's been also kind of a shifting area with plant based meat companies that got very hyped and then have kind of um, fallen off a little bit, and vertical farms, and a
Hmm.
big pushback against kind of insect proteins and things like that. So, do you see maybe a second wave coming with a slightly different perspective on what food tech might look like?
Yeah, I mean, you ran over many of the categories, and some of those we've invested in successfully, some unsuccessfully, like
Hmm.
indoor vertical farming, controlled environment agriculture is kind of the more umbrella term because it includes not just like maybe an urban vertical farm with a bunch of LED lights, but also big, large greenhouses. We've had some success with those, and we've had some failures with those. I think the industry as a whole is seeing that they have to develop profitable business models. You have to put profitability before, um, you know, idealism, and
Purpose.
that's seems like it would be common sense in business, but in the investment community, you see a lot of people leading with their ideals versus
Mhm.
their common sense sort of profitable lenses.
Where is the breakdown on that in terms of, especially that vertical farming or
Yeah.
indoor farming? Is it
Uh,
the distribution?
that's really a good question. A lot of it is just, there's a bunch of things from my perspective. One is people try to do a one size fits all sorts of vertical farms where if you put a farm that requires intensive lighting and pumps and systems, electricity consumption, climate control in an area with high electricity costs, that's probably not going to work out well for you.
Mhm, mhm.
If you put a farm that is labor intensive, regardless of what it looks like in an urban area with high labor costs, that's probably not going to work out well for you. And I think we've seen that with some of these recent massive bankruptcies of these companies, like Plenty, and that were funded to the tune of billions of dollars or $1 billion plus, where all that money has gone down the drain in producing and trying to make unprofitable business models work. I really think, I always tell people in the controlled environment or the indoor environment space, we're looking for the Ray Kroc of indoor farming, or somebody comes up with this. The idea is not necessarily new. Hey, we're going to serve food, but to do it, serving food at the local level, a restaurant. Well, why don't we do it at scale and create a model that can be replicated over and over and over again? We just simply haven't seen that, and that's after talking to dozens and dozens and dozens of these indoor farms and seeing their pitches. And that's not to say that can't be done. It's just that I think it's still a good idea. Decentralizing the food system is still smart.
Mhm.
That produces resiliency, but we don't need to be growing 85% of the leafy greens or whatever that number is in a single county in California, that's distributed all over the country. I think we can do better at that. But those people that are trying to do that need to make sure that they can create a model that works and it will make money for them and their investors.
What role do you think robotics and AI is gonna play in that future of food?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that I mean, we've invested in a couple of portfolio companies. They're working with AI. One was several years ago, before AI was really took off like it did about 24 years ago. And there's two different parts of AI. There's the digital, what I call sort of the digital interface. Like people are familiar with Chat GPT, Grok, whatever, where they are leveraging those large language models to take the, both the deep search and the analytics that are behind them to provide insights to help in the case of ag, better growing decisions. When do I plant? What's the weather going to do? What can I visualize this piece of land and determine things about my field production that may have been harder to do without the visualization and AI and the analysis and that sort of thing. Our portfolio companies one of our portfolio companies is evolved around analyzing livestock feeding, where they make simple decisions on for feeding cattle and determine, are the troughs empty? Are the cattle being fed? Well, that sort of thing. But then there's where the AI meets the analog world or the real world, and that's where you get into robotics. And we've seen and invested in some robotics companies that are trying to address the challenges of labor in agriculture. Manual labor specifically, it is a challenge for many agriculture businesses. And up until recently, well, still, most of those companies are revolved around using AI that is involved in robotics, for weeding and some harvesting and things like that. And, very specific mechanical devices, robotics that resemble tractors or are attached to tractors or part of tractors. Where I think the industry is going to go in the next 5 years is based on humanoid robotics. So, Tesla's making them. There's, dozens of other companies making these humanoid robotics that supposedly are going to hit the market in the next 24 months or so. I really think that that's where agriculture, not to mention a lot of manufacturing and production, is going to move towards, because our world is built for humans. So there's a form factor that is optimized for people, 5'9" people to go around, average size humans to go around with 5 fingers on each hand and bend down and pick up things. So it stands to reason that as soon as robotics reaches the point where they can perform some of those tasks, that they're going to start moving. So I really think we're going to see agriculture robots
Really?
out in the fields doing things, humanoid robots, in the next 5 years. It's going to have no idea what that's going to look like as far as impacts on labor and migration, all the things that go into that dynamic and economics. But I think it's going to happen, and it's probably going to start slow, and then it's going to evolve very rapidly. And it's we've all seen the science fiction movies,
Yeah.
and I hate to say that science fiction mirrors reality, but I think that might be the case, or I could be completely wrong. But I think that we're going to see that.
Wouldn't it be better to invest in actually improving the nature of the process that would make it less backbreaking for the humans that actually work in agriculture, rather than just wholly replacing them with humanoid robots?
Yeah, for sure, and that's been happening for decades. There automation in certain aspects of agriculture has been happening for a long time. Like, just looking at row crop farming, the tractors and the size and the scale. That's one of the reasons that has become taken over by larger and larger producers, is because the automation has enabled one person or a couple of people to literally farm thousands of acres of land, whereas in 50, 100 years ago, that would have been back-breaking work involving, hundreds of people doing that same work. So that is happening. But at the same regard, if you take something like indoor agriculture, so you have a greenhouse and it's got tomatoes and they're vertically oriented, and there are some machines that have been tried to try to automate the harvesting, because again, the business models are not there yet with regard to saving on labor and things like that. So there's definitely companies out there, and so with varying levels of successes trying to do that. But at the same time, they've got farm hands, seasonal farm labor that's in there picking tomatoes and things like that. Well,
Mhm.
AI has already been proven that can tell when a strawberry is ripe or a tomato is ripe and when it's time to pick. So to me, it's not a stretch to have a humanoid robot doing that versus a purposely built agriculture, robot. And, there's probably ag tech people out there that are going to scream at me because I'm saying that, but I really think that that's the way it's going to go.
It's so interesting. So, what is the human factor then in a regenerative future of agriculture?
Yeah. And man, I'll tell you, livestock, good luck having robots do livestock. That's always
Mhm.
going to, we still have cowboys and cowgirls out there on a lot of our farms riding horses and doing things the old fashioned way. That is an industry. I think automation is almost impossible because you're dealing with these massively heavy, strong animals that they get a say in how they're handled, and robots are probably not the best way to deal with them. So
Mhm.
you know that's one of the reasons we like the livestock protein business. There's a
Yeah.
lot of other reasons, but that's one of the reasons. It's still very traditional, and but at the same time, it can be done in a very sustainable manner.
Sure. The threat to those cowboys and cowgirls, though, is now the push for lab grown meat and meat alternatives coming out of these really strong climate based narratives.
100%. Yeah. Well, I say 100%, but yes, that's the narrative, right? I saw a story this morning that said, "Oh, we finally made a profitable, um, at a unit level, profitable cultured meat, laboratory grown meat, whatever you want to call it." I'm like,
Mm.
okay, maybe. Will people eat it? I have doubts. Even if it's genetically similar to meat, I just have doubts that's going to be an attractive project or product.
I mean, and consumers are bearing that out because the sort of beyond meat
Hmm.
craze was it feels like a bit of a trend. It's
Yeah.
past. People aren't as excited about meat alternatives as the market would have hoped, but they're
Hmm.
still investing. I mean, we wrote a story on Collapse Life recently about a milk alternative, which is
Hmm.
not oat milk or rice milk or anything like that. It's literally milk. Uh, well, it's
Manufactured milk, or like,
yeah.
yeah, they take genes and fermentation, and yeah, it's like I have a hard time understanding, like, there's animals, they make milk, it's part of their life process, and that milk is very healthy for humans to consume as well.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's part of the whole MAHA, the opposition to raw milk production. We have a company that is in our portfolio, a wonderful creamery up here in North Texas that has a raw milk distribution thing, and they do very well with it. And there's a high demand for not just milk, but unpasteurized raw milk right now.
Do you find the producers that you talk to and are working with, especially those who are kind of following the regenerative, sustainable path, do you find that they are kind of forming alliances and coalitions with the health conscious consumers who are part of this resurgent healthy movement? Are we seeing
I
a
think
sort of populist food movement?
I don't. I haven't really seen that yet. I mean, maybe in individual circumstances. Food and ag is very fragmented, and
Mm,
interestingly enough, there is still a very wide divide between food on this side and ag on this side, and you would think they would be interwoven, but they're not. They're different coalitions, different lobbying groups, different perspectives, and there are. On the other hand, there are producers that we work with that want to cut out that whole middleman chain, and like direct to producer is a big deal in ag right now, and
mm,
that's a continuing trend where I am a cattle farmer, regenerative cattle farmer. We have one in Southern California we work with, and they sell farmers markets all over Southern California. So it's very quick, short supply chain. It's very, very neat supply chain.
mhm,
At the same time, that's a hard distribution model. So unless you live in a population dense place like Southern California, some of the other producers we work with that do direct consumer sell via their own website or intermediary website. That's another thing that's popular. that's growing in popularity. And whenever you have something as geographically dispersed as we are in the United States, we're not
Mhm.
Europe where you can, basically drive across the continent in a few hours. You have to have pretty big supply chains,
Yeah.
robust supply chains, and that involve lots of steps. And so even shipping, ordering meat from a grass-fed cattle producer in Montana and shipping it down to Texas where we live, there's a lot of steps involved with that. There's a lot of inefficiencies so that's hard. Those supply chain logistical obstacles are hard to get past if you're going to
Right.
build this regenerative ag sort of system.
Right. Some of the things that you just mentioned, so cutting out the middleman, decentralizing production, these are things that do not sit very well with big corporate
Mhm,
ag or big
mhm,
food. What
mhm.
response are you seeing? I mean, they're not just going to quietly sit back and let this happen. So, what do you think the response is, and what can we anticipate seeing as a pushback?
Yeah, I mean, given that I don't really interact with those people a whole lot, it's there's this is sort of speculation on my part, but some of the models we are seeing is some of those companies are playing that, if you can't beat them, join them sort of thing, which is not bad. There's aggregators that are coming forth where you're taking, grass-fed producers, let's say in the case of cattle, and aggregating them and then selling to the larger, big four, um, on the meat side, packers, and selling it under certain labels. And so that's sort of a win-win. You're still getting these small producers are staying viable, and you're seeing the distribution channels stay in place, that are going to be in place for a long, long time, barring any kind of big disruptive event. So that's one aspect. I don't think they're necessarily pushing back against it because they don't have to,
Hmm.
because it's just not at this point. It's not a big impact on their market share. Um, but if you're a small grass-fed producer trying to compete in that environment, you're gonna have to be creative. If, regardless of what you're growing, you're gonna have to be creative in the way you market and distribute your products that are produced on your farm or ranch.
Yeah. We were just recently on a road trip. We were driving through Tennessee and we did a double take because we saw a billboard that said, "Stand up for glyphosate." And we
Oh,
couldn't quite believe what we saw. We looked into it a little bit
mhm,
more. And there's a big campaign going on in a number of battleground states. So Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, Idaho, I think, Missouri, where these states are trying to pass legislation to protect pesticide
mhm,
manufacturers from liability, because there are all these anti-glyphosate lawsuits. And Georgia just a jury just awarded a guy more than $2 billion,
mhm,
because he claimed that glyphosate caused his cancer. And so Georgia is one of those states where Bayer is funding this campaign and funding a bill to protect, so that these kind of suits cannot come to the market
mhm,
anymore. And so there are a group of farmers who are in support of those kinds of bills because they want to use glyphosate. They say that it's an important tool for their production, just as their tractor is. And if you take away glyphosate, it will um, increase their input costs, and it will just make life more difficult, and food prices will go up. What are your thoughts on that? Have you heard about this
Yeah, I
happening?
mean, we see everybody in ag is pretty familiar with the whole battle over glyphosate, and there's other, there's related sort of battles over, like, various herbicide drift. So if I have a regenerative farm and my neighbor is not, and I spray it and the wind blows one way, I'm like, suddenly I'm not regenerative anymore, and that can cost a lot of money. And um, you know literally people can lose their certification if you have like an organic certification, things like
Yeah.
that farmers have spent a lot of money and time and energy trying to get certified by the USDA to grow organically. So it's definitely, it's a challenge. I don't know don't know the answer. I do know that glyphosate is not going away.
Mhm.
There's a lot of ag production that's very dependent on it, and there's not at that scale. There's not necessarily anything that can do it. I'm ashamed to say I use Roundup in the little cracks in my driveway and sidewalk because that's other than pulling out the weeds, there's not much. Even though I try to use like organic fertilizer on the rest of my lawn, it's a chemical that works. Is it a chemical that has health problems? I don't know. That's for the lawyers and the scientists to figure out. I I think most people prefer not to have chemicals in their food. I, I think if you poll people, that would be a universal response.
Mhm.
People are either ignorant of it or don't care about it. I tend to look at it more holistically, like okay, whether or not it's conventional farming is bad for people or the fields themselves, and there's plenty of indications that it's not great for soil health over the long term. I think if you look at the watersheds, and I've got a background as a naval officer, spent a lot of time on the oceans, and things like red tides. I think it's pretty clear that most of these red tides have some relationship to agriculture production that are
Mhm.
happening in the Gulf of America and Florida, and those things, and killing off a lot of fish and plenty of other places in the world. So it's something that needs to be continued to discuss and talked about and not ignored.
Yeah. So yeah, there's this sort of strange kind of movement where most people would agree they wouldn't want chemicals in their food, but of course, results speak for themselves. So farmers can use a product that's very effective and it makes their life easier. Then they can keep prices down. Most people would prefer to pay less for food rather than more. So it is an interesting um, tension. And I don't think
Right.
there's any easy answers to it. But I think, having these kinds of conversations, I think are helpful because at least people are aware of what's happening and can
Mhm.
make choices. I think that's the most important thing. And why it's helpful, what you're doing is allowing people to have those options so that it doesn't all just become consolidated in one place. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely feels like an uphill battle sometimes. Um, and we're pro ag in general. Agriculture, like I said, it's big and diverse, and it's but it's very important. It's important to America, and it's important to the world because everyone has to eat. So we understand that systems don't change overnight, and if you're a if you're a Midwest corn soy farmer making soy to export to China one year, and then corn to provide to the ethanol manufacturers, which I can't stand ethanol, the next year. We understand that. I mean, that's a reality, but maybe there's ways to gently evolve and change that system.
If you had 10 minutes with Robert Kennedy, what would you want him to know about from your perspective?
Yeah, I would say, I would try to bring the investor perspective and the capital formation perspective to him. That some of these conversations that we've discussions we've just had, that it is important to make changes, both gradual and sometimes sudden, and to the extent that there's lobbies and politics and interest groups involved in agriculture um, that support the status quo. There's a smaller but growing lobbies and interest groups that support the other side. They may not be as well funded or as politically charged, but they're out there. And I think he and other people realize that the way, just because food system is what it is now, doesn't mean it has to be that way,
Mhm.
and we can change it. I mean, it's evolved. I think if you look at agriculture, I think we're in the fourth wave of agriculture, starting with industrial revolution, steam power tractors, and then um, you know, big chemicals, which is 1950s and 60s, and then now we're getting to the agriculture technology and precision agriculture, and then maybe at the same time regenerative, which is going back to some of those older farming processes, more in a more automated manner. There's a place for everything, but if you start which I think is what RFKJ is like. Let's look at people's health, which really is the most important
Right.
aspect of this, and then backward sort of plan or look down the food system, food chain. Maybe that's the right place to start is with the health of people,
Right.
and lead with that.
And so what are you most excited about in terms of what you have on offer at Harvest Returns that fits into that?
Yeah, one of the things that we have in all these discussions with farmers is we see that the ag investment or the ag credit system is not always flexible to help them, especially some of the regenerative farmers. So we've been doing what we call private credit, which is giving loans to farmers that are separate from the loans they might get from a bank, more flexible, negotiated terms, uh, some cases preferable terms, and creative collateralization, things like that. So we put together a credit fund, which enables people to buy a portfolio of loans that we issue with our network of farmers and ranchers and other agribusinesses, and produce nice steady cash flow. So we're trying to create just a win-win situation for our investors and the farmers, and we've evolved that since we've been around since 2016. We've tried different things, and this is one of the more successful models we've come upon.
And just for our listeners who might be interested, just explain a little bit about how it works and whether anyone listening would be able to participate and invest with you, or do you have to be high net worth? How does it work?
Mhm. Yeah, so we raise capital, and which means we sell securities, which means we are under the auspices of the Securities Exchange Commission, the FINRA, SEC. So there's a lot of rules involved with who can invest in what, and these are private sorts of offerings, which restricts, unfortunately, the way the rules are set now. And we could have a whole show on that, but who can invest in certain offerings. So in the example of the private credit deals, unfortunately, that's available to accredited investors only. And there's some definitions around accredited investors, and those are evolving,
Mhm.
involving net worth or income, those sorts of things, or expertise. There's other offerings we do that are available to what we call sophisticated, limited numbers of unaccredited investors. So we have those every now and then too. So there's a variety of ways you can invest with us, and not even invest with us, but invest in agriculture in general. But that's the whole reason we set up this company, um, was to provide more options for people to invest in farming, where you didn't have to have the expertise to go out and buy a farm on your own, and then which is a great thing if you can do that, but it's not really accessible to most people.
Yeah. Any final thoughts before we leave you?
No, I just, I think I probably said this last time we talked, was people need to think more about agriculture. We take our food for granted because it's readily available. And when you go to some place where it's not readily available, or not available in quantity and variety like it is here, and affordability, then you won't take it for granted. So
Mhm.
um, I've my whole attitude around this formed during my time in the Navy and traveling to places like Somalia and Iraq and
Wow.
Afghanistan, where people didn't always have access to food. So we're blessed in this country, and we should also be thankful for the farmers, and spend more time thinking about them and how we can help that agriculture.
100%. Well, we thank you so much, Chris, for all the work that you're doing and for coming back and chatting with us again. Remind people how they can find you and learn more about Harvest Returns.
Sure. Best way is harvestreturns.com. Of course, we're out on all those social media, and we're happy to talk to you. Like, I answer the phone, so if you call, want to talk to me, I'll be happy to talk to anybody.
Yeah, we can vouch for that here at Collapse Life. Chris is very accessible and very helpful. So thank you so much, Chris. I hope that we get to speak again soon.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you so much. All right, folks. So here we are at the end of yet another podcast and yet another amazing guest. Thank you so much to Chris for sharing his time with us. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and please share it with others. If you want to learn more about this channel, visit collapselife.com and please sign up for our newsletter. And if you liked this episode and you want to support us, you can do that on your own terms by checking out our Buy Me a Coffee page. We run on caffeine, and you can buy us 1 or 5. Everything helps to keep us alert, keep us focused while the world is moving a million miles an hour. Please come back and join us again for another vital conversation next week. And until then, remember to keep your chin up. It's only collapse. See you soon.